Good evening, friends, and welcome to Sleepy Time Tales, a podcast aimed at helping you to get a good night's sleep. Do you find your mind troubled with the stresses of modern life, especially when the lights are out and you're trying to get a restful night? Does your spinning mind keep you awake? Follow my voice down the path towards a good night's rest. Listen to me tell you a story that will keep your mind from wandering to your daytime problems, the ones you can't solve right now and will be easier to solve while rested. Listen to my voice and allow yourself to drift, following the twists and turns of the story, but slowly letting go and drifting into sleep. Let my voice wash over you at a comfortable volume and allow yourself to be distracted from the stresses and worries that play on your mind. Whether you need help falling asleep or going back to sleep in the middle of the night, you can trust me to keep you company and help you to wake up tomorrow in a rested state. You may need to try out Sleepy Time Tales for a few nights to get used to this slightly strange idea, but I believe it will be well worth your while. Because I'm here to work with you, to create a safe space, a cocoon in which you can curl up and allow nature to take its course. So settle down, relax, and allow yourself to get lost in my telling of tonight's story. Before we get to tonight's reading, I'd like to ask for a few minutes of your time. Sleepy Time Tales is purely a listener-supported podcast. I can only keep it going, I can only pay for the services and tools that I use, and justify the time that I use on it, thanks to the generosity of listeners like you. Honestly, I've actually even had opportunities lately to take on ads, but I've decided that it's not something I want to do for Sleepy Time Tales anymore. So I really do need your help to keep it going. And if you're finding Sleepy Time Tales useful, if it helps you to get a restful night, and you'd like to keep it going out to thousands of insomniacs just like you, and you have the means to help me keep it going, please consider supporting on the Patreon at patreon.com/sleepytimetales. This is monthly support that helps me keep the lights on, but can get you fun bonuses based on your contribution level. So go along there, take a look, and sign up if you're willing. And if monthly seems a big ask, which I completely understand, you can make once-off tips to the tip jar on the website. And if you'd like to help Sleepy Time Tales without having to do so financially, you can simply spread the word. If there's anyone you know who needs some help to get to sleep, just tell them about Sleepy Time Tales and see what happens. And that's enough of that. Let's get on with learning about these adorable little birds and their nesting habits. We return this week to Birds in Their Nests by Mary Howitt, and we pick up learning about the nesting habits of the dipper. This nest is extremely soft and elastic, sometimes of large size, the reason for which one cannot understand. It is generally near to the water, and being kept damp by its situation, is always so fresh-looking, so like the mass of its immediate surroundings, as scarcely to be discoverable by the quickest eye. When the young are hatched, they soon go abroad with their parents, and then, instead of the one solitary bird, you may see them in little parties of from 5 to 7, going on in the same sort of way, only all the merrier because there are more of them. Chapter 6. The Nightingale. Philomela, or the nightingale, is the head of the somewhat large bird family of warblers, and is the most renowned of all feathered songsters, though some judges think the garden ousel exceeds it in mellowness, and the thrush in compass of voice, but that in every other respect it excels them all. For my part, however, I think no singing bird is equal to it, and listening to it when in full song, in the stillness of a summer's night, am ready to say with good old Isaac Walton, the nightingale, another of my airy creatures, breathes such sweet music out of her little instrumental throat, that it might make mankind to think that miracles had not ceased. He that at midnight, when the weary labourer sleeps securely, should hear, as I have very often heard, the clear airs, the sweet descants, the natural rising and falling, the doubling and redoubling of her voice, might well be lifted above earth and say, Lord, what music hast thou provided for the saints in heaven, when thou affordest bad men such music on earth? In colour, the upper parts of the nightingale are of a rich brown, the tail of a reddish tint, the throat and under parts of the body greyish-white, the neck and breast grey, the bills and legs light brown. Its size is about that of the garden warblers, which it resembles in form, being in fact one of that family. Thus the most admired of all singers, the subject of poets' songs and eulogies, the bird that people walk far and wide to listen to, of which they talk for weeks before it comes, noting down the day of its arrival as if it were the queen or the queen's son, is yet nothing but a little insignificant brown bird, not to be named with the parrot for plumage, nor with our little goldfinch, who always looks as if he had his Sunday suit on. But this is a good lesson for us. The little brown nightingale, with his little brown wife in the thickety copse, with their simple, unpretending nest, not built up aloft on the tree branch, but humbly at the tree's root, or even on the very ground itself, may teach us that the world's external show or costliness is not true greatness. The world's best bird singer might have been as big as an eagle, attired in colours of blue and scarlet and orange like the grandest macaw. But the great Creator willed that it should not be so. His strength and his furiousness and his cruel capacity were sufficient for the eagle, and his shining vestments for the macaw, whilst the bird to which was given the divinest gift of song must be humble and unobtrusive, small of size, with no surpassing beauty of plumage, and loving best to hide itself in the thick seclusion of the copse in which it broods, the little mother bird, the very counterpart of himself, upon her olive-coloured eggs. Mr. Harrison Weir has given us a sweet little picture of the nightingale at home. Somewhere, not far off, runs the high road, or it may be a pleasant woodland lane leading from one village to another, and probably known as Nightingale Lane, and traversed night after night by rich and poor, learned and unlearned, to listen to the bird. In our own neighbourhood we have a Nightingale Lane, with its thickety copses on either hand, its young oaks and Spanish chestnuts shooting upwards, and tangles of wild roses and thick masses of brambles, throwing their long sprays over old, mossy and ivied stumps of trees, cut or blown down in the last generation. Little pools and watercourses here and there, with their many-coloured mosses and springing rushes, a very paradise for birds. This is in Surrey. And Surrey nightingales, it is said, are the finest that sing. With this comes the saddest part of the story. Bird catchers follow the nightingale, and once in his hands, farewell to the pleasant copse with the young oaks and Spanish chestnuts, the wild rose tangles, the little boscar hollow at the old tree root, in one of which the little nest is built, and the little wife broods on her eggs. Generally, however, the unhappy bird, if he be caught, is taken soon after his arrival in this country. For nightingales are migratory, and arrive with us about the middle of April. The male bird comes about a fortnight before the female, and begins to sing in his loneliness a song of salutation, a sweet song which expresses with a tender yearning his desire for her companionship. Birds taken at this time, before the mate has arrived, and whilst he is only singing to call and welcome her, are said still to sing on through the summer in the hope, long deferred, that she may yet come. He will not give her up, though he is no longer in the freedom of the wood, So he sings and sings, and if he live over the winter, he will sing the same song the following spring, for the want is again in his heart. He cannot believe but that she will still come. The cruel bird catchers therefore try all their arts to take him in this early stage of his visit to us. Should he be taken later when he is mated, and as we see him in our picture, with all the wealth of his little life around him, he cannot sing long. How should he, in a narrow cage in dingy street of London or some other great town, perhaps with his eyes put out, for his cruel captor fancies he sings best if blind? He may sing perhaps for a while, thinking that he can wake himself out of this dreadful dream of captivity, darkness, and solitude. But it is no dream. The terrible reality at length comes upon him, and before the summer is over, he dies of a broken heart. It is a curious fact that the nightingale confines itself, without apparent reason, to certain countries and to certain parts of England. For instance, though it visits Sweden, and even the temperate parts of Russia, it is not met with in Scotland, North Wales, nor Ireland. Neither is it found in any of our northern counties excepting Yorkshire, and there only in the neighbourhood of Doncaster. Neither is it known in the southwestern counties, as Cornwall and Devonshire. It is supposed to migrate during the winter into Egypt and Syria. It has been seen among the willows of Jordan and the olive trees of Judea. But we have not, to our knowledge, any direct mention of it in the Scriptures. This Solomon no doubt had it in his thoughts, in his sweet description of the spring. Lo, the winter is past, the rain is over and gone, flowers appear on the earth, the time of singing of birds is come, and the voice of the turtle is heard in our land. A recent traveller in Syria tells me that she heard nightingales singing at 4 o'clock one morning in April of last year in the lofty regions of the Lebanon. There have been various attempts to introduce the nightingale into such parts of this country as it has not yet frequented. For instance, a gentleman of Gower, a seaside district of Glamorganshire, the climate of which is remarkably mild, procured a number of young birds from Norfolk and Surrey, hoping they would find themselves so much at home in the beautiful woods there as to return the following year. But none came. Again, as regards Scotland, Sir John Sinclair purchased a large number of nightingales' eggs at £1 each, and employed several men to place them carefully in robins' nests to be hatched. So far all succeeded well. The foster mothers reared the nightingales, which when full-fledged flew about as if quite at home. But when September came, the usual month for the migration of the nightingale, the mysterious impulse awoke in the hearts of the young strangers, and obeying it, they suddenly disappeared and never after returned. Mr. Harrison Weir has given us a very accurate drawing of the nightingale's nest, which is slight and somewhat fragile in construction, made of withered leaves, mostly of oak, and lined with dry grass. The author of British Birds describes one in his possession as composed of slips of the inner bark of willow, mixed with the leaves of the lime and the elm, lined with fibrous roots, grass, and a few hairs. But whatever the materials used may be, the effect produced is exactly the same. In concluding our little chapter on this bird, I would mention that in the Turkish cemeteries, from which the old custom of planting a cypress at the head and foot of every grave have now become cypress woods, nightingales abound, it having been also an old custom of love to keep these birds on every grave. Chapter 7. The Skylark. The skylark, that beautiful singer, which carries its joy up to the very gates of heaven, as it were, has inspired more poets to sing about it than any other bird living. Wordsworth says, as in an ecstasy of delight, up with me into the clouds, for their song lark is strong. Up with me into the clouds, singing and singing, with clouds and sky about me ringing. Lift me, guide me till I find that spot that seems so to my mind. Shelley, in an ode which expresses the bird's ecstasy of song, also thus addresses it in a strain of sadness peculiar to himself. Hail to thee, blithe spirit, bird thou never wert, that from heaven or near it pourest thy full heart in profuse strains of unpremeditated art. Higher still and higher from the earth thou springest, like a cloud of fire, the deep blue thou wingest, and singing still doth soar, and soaring ever singest. Better than all measures of delightful sound, better than all treasures that in books are found, thy skill to poet were, thou scorner of the ground. Teach me half the gladness that the brain must know, such harmonious madness from my lips should flow. The world should listen then, as I am listening now. James Hogg, the Ettrick shepherd, who had listened to the bird with delight on the Scottish hills, thus sings of it. Bird of the wilderness, blithesome and cumberless, sweet as thy mate in o'er the moorland and lea, emblem of happiness, blessed is thy dwelling place, or to abide in the desert with thee. Wild as they lay and loud, far in the downy cloud, love gives it energy, love gave it birth. Where on thy dewy wing, where art thou journeying? Thy lay is in heaven, thy love is on earth. O'er fell and mountain sheen, o'er moor and mountain green, o'er the red streamer that heralds the day, o'er the cloudlet dim, o'er the rainbow's rim, musical cherubs soar and singing away. Then when the gloaming comes, low in the heather blooms, sweet will thy welcome and bed of love be, emblem of happiness, blessed in thy dwelling place, O to abide in the desert with thee. But we must not forget the earthy life of the bird in all these sweet songs about him. The plumage of the skylark is brown in various shades, the forepart of the neck reddish-white, spotted with brown, the breast and underpart of the body yellowish-white. Its feet are peculiar, being furnished with an extraordinarily long hind claw, the purpose of which has puzzled many naturalists. But whatever nature intended for it, the bird has been known to make use of it for a purpose which cannot fail to interest us and call forth our admiration. This shall be presently explained. The nest is built on the ground, either between two clods of earth and the deep footprint of cattle, or some other small hollow suitable for the purpose, and is composed of dry grass, hair, and leaves. The hair is mostly used for the lining. Here the mother bird lays 4 or 5 eggs of pale sepia color, with spots and markings of darker hue. She has generally 2 broods in the year and commences sitting in May. The he-lark begins to sing early in the spring. Bewick says, he rises from the neighborhood of the nest almost perpendicularly in the air by successive springs, and hovers at a vast height. His descent, on the contrary, is in an oblique direction, unless he is threatened by birds of prey or attracted by his mate, and on these occasions he drops like a stone. With regard to his ascent, I must, however, add that it is in a spiral direction, and what Bewick represents as springs are his sudden spiral flights after pausing to sing. Another peculiarity must be mentioned. All his bones are hollow, and he can inflate them with air from his lungs, so that it becomes, as it were, a little balloon, which accounts for the buoyancy with which he ascends, and the length of time he can support himself in the air, often for an hour at a time. Still more extraordinary is the wonderful power and reach of his voice. For while probably the 700 or 1,000 voices of the grand chorus of an oratorio would fail to fill the vast spaces of the atmosphere, it can be done by this glorious little songster, which, mounting upwards, makes itself heard without effort when it can be seen no longer. The attachment of the parents to their young is very great, and has been seen to exhibit itself in a remarkable manner. The nest being placed on the open ground, often pasture or in a field of mowing grass, is very liable to be disturbed. Many, therefore, are the instances of the bird's tender solicitude either for the young or for its eggs, one of which I will give you from Mr. Jesse. In case of alarm, he says, either by cattle grazing near the nest or by the approach of the mower, the parent birds remove their eggs by means of their long claws to a place of greater security. And this I have observed to be effected in a very short space of time. He says that when one of his mowers first told him of this fact, he could scarcely believe it, but that he afterwards saw it himself, and that he regarded it as only another proof of the affection which these birds show their offspring. Instances are also on record of larks removing their young by carrying them on their backs. In one case, the young were thus removed from a place of danger into a field of standing corn. But however successful the poor birds may be in removing their eggs, they are not always so with regard to their young, as Mr. Yarrell relates. An instance came under his notice in which the little fledgling proved too heavy for the parent to carry, and being dropped from a height of about 30 feet was killed in the fall. Of all captive birds, none grieves me more than the skylark. Its impulse is to soar, which is impossible in the narrow spaces of the cage. And in this unhappy condition, when seized by the impulse of song, he flings himself upwards and is dashed down again by its cruel barriers. For this reason, the top of the lark's cage is always bedded with green baize to prevent his injuring himself. In the freedom of nature, he is the joyous minstrel of liberty and love, carrying upwards and sending down from above his buoyant song, which seems to fall down through the golden sunshine, like a flood of sparkling melody. I am not aware of the height to which the lark soars, but it must be very great, as he becomes diminished to a mere speck, almost invisible in the blaze of light. Yet high as he may soar, he never loses the consciousness of the little mate and the nestlings below. But their first cry of danger or anxiety, though the cry may be scarce audible to the human ear, thrills up aloft to the singer, and he comes down with a direct, arrow-like flight, while otherwise his descent is more leisurely, and said by some to be in the direct spiral line of his ascent. Larks, unfortunately for themselves, are considered very fine eating. Immense numbers of them are killed for the table, not only on the continent, but in England. People cry shame on the Roman epicure Lucilius, dining on a stew of nightingales' tongues nearly 2,000 years ago. And no more can I reconcile to myself the daily feasting on these lovely little songsters, which may be delicate eating, but are no less God's gifts to gladden and beautify the earth. Chapter 8. The Linnet. Linnets are a branch of a larger family of finches, all very familiar to us. They are cousins also to the dear imprudent sparrows and the pretty siskin or abbadivines. The linnets are all compactly and stoutly built, with short necks and good-sized heads, with short, strong, pointed bills made for the ready picking up of seed and grain on which they live. Most of them have 2 broods in the season, and they build a bulky, deep, and compact nest, just in accordance with their character and figure. But though all linnet nests have a general resemblance of form, They vary more or less in the material used. Linnets change their plumage once a year, and have a much more spruce and brilliant appearance when they have their new summer suits on. They are numerous in all parts of the country, and excepting in the season when they have young, congregate in flocks, and in winter are attracted to the neighborhood of man, finding much of their food in farmyards and among stacks. The linnet of our picture is the greater redpoll, one of 4 brothers of the linnet family, and is the largest of the 4. The others are the twit or mountain linnet, the mealy linnet, and the lesser redpoll, the smallest of the 4, all very much alike and easily mistaken for each other. The name redpoll is given from the bright crimson spot on their heads, pole or pole being the old Saxon word for head. The back of our linnet's head and the sides of his neck are of dingy ash colour, his back of a warm brown tint, his wings black, his throat of a dull white, spotted with brown, his breast a brilliant red, and the under part of his body a dingy white. The linnet, amongst singing birds, is what a songwriter is among poets. He is not a grand singer, like the blackbird or the thrush, the mistle thrush or the woodlark, all of which seem to have an epic story in their songs, nor, of course, like the Skylarks singing up to the gates of heaven, or the nightingale, that chief psalmist of all bird singers. But though much humbler than any of these, he is a sweet and pleasant melodist, a singer of charming little songs, full of the delight of summer, the freshness of open heaths with their fragrant gorse, of the Scottish brae with its bonny broom, also in golden blossom. His are unpretending little songs of intense enjoyment, simple thanksgivings for the pleasures of life, for the little brown hen bird who has not a bit of scarlet in her plumage, and who sits in a snug nest on her fine little white eggs, with a circle of freckles and brown spots at the thicker end, always alike. A sweet patient mother waiting for the time when the young ones will come into life from that delicate shell covering, blind at first, the slightly clothed in greyish-brown, 5 little linnets gaping for food. The linnet mostly builds its nest in low bushes, the firs being its favourite resort. It is constructed outside of dry grass, roots and moss, and lined with hair and wool. We have it here in our picture for our friend Mr. Harrison Weir, always faithful in his transcripts of nature, has an eye also for beauty. Round the nest, as you see, blossoms of the yellow firs, and round it too rises a chevaux de frise of fir spines, green and tender to look at, but sharp as needles. Yes, here on this furzy common and on hundreds of others all over this happy land, and on hillsides, with the snowy hawthorn and the pink-blossomed crabtree above them and below, the mossy banks gemmed with pale yellow primroses, are thousands of linnet nests and father linnets, singing for very joy of life in spring, and for summer which is before then. And as they sing, the man ploughing in the fields hard by, and the little lad leading the horses hear the song. And though he may say nothing about it, the man thinks and wonders what the birds sing just as sweetly now as when he was young. And the lad thinks how pleasant it is, forgetting the while that he is tired, and whistling something like a linnet tune, impresses it on his memory, to be recalled with a tender sentiment years hence when he is a man, toiling perhaps in Australia or Canada, or maybe to speak to him like a guardian angel in some time of trial or temptation, and bring him back to the innocence of boyhood and to his God. Our picture shows up the fledgling brood of the linnet and the parent bird feeding them. The attachment of this bird to its young is very great. Bishop Huntley in his History of Birds give us the following anecdote in proof of it. A linnet's nest, containing 4 young ones, was found by some children and carried home with the intention of rearing and taming them. The old ones, attracted by their chirping, fluttered around the children till they reached home, when the nest was carried upstairs and placed in the nursery window. The old birds soon approached the nest and fed the young. This being observed, the nest was afterwards placed on a table in the middle of the room, the window being left open, when the parents came in and fed their young as before. Still further to try their attachment, the nest was then placed in a cage. But still the old birds returned with food, and towards evening actually perched on the cage, regardless of the noise made by several children. Chapter 9. The Peewit. The peewit, lapwing or plover, belongs to the naturalist family of gallators or waders, all of which are furnished with strong legs and feet for walking, whilst all which inhabit watery places or feed their young among the waves have legs sufficiently long to enable them to wade, whence comes the family name. The peewit or lapwing is a very interesting bird, from its peculiar character and habits. Its plumage is handsome, the upper part of the body of a rich green with metallic reflections, the sides of the neck and base of the tail of a pure white. The tail is black, so is the top of the head, which is furnished with a long painted crest, lying backwards, but which can be raised at pleasure. In length, the bird is about a foot. The peewit lives in all parts of this country, and furnishes one of the pleasantly peculiar features of open seashores and wide moorland wastes, in the solitude of which its incessant, plaintive cry has an especially befitting sound, like the very spirit of the scene, moaning in unison with the waves, and wailing over the wide melancholy of the waste. Nevertheless, the peewit is not in itself mournful, for it is a particularly lively and active bird, sporting and frolicking in the air with its fellows, now whirling round and round, and now ascending to a great height on untiring wing, and down again, running along the ground and leaping about from spot to spot, as if for very amusement. It is, however, with all its agility, a very untidy nest-maker. In fact, it makes no better nest than a few dry bents scraped together in a shallow hole, like a rude saucer or dish, in which she can lay her eggs, always 4 in number. But though taking so little trouble about her nest, she is always careful to lay the narrow ends of her eggs in the center, as shown in the picture, though as yet there are but 3. A 4th, however, will soon come to complete the cross-like figure, after which she will begin to sit. These eggs, under the name of plovers' eggs, are in great request as luxuries for the breakfast table, and it may be thought that laid thus openly on the bare earth they are very easily found. It is not so, however, for they look so much like the ground itself, so like little bits of moorland earth or old seaside stone, that it is difficult to distinguish them. But in proportion as the bird makes so insufficient and uncarded a nest, so all the greater is the anxiety, both of herself and her mate, about the eggs. Hence, while she is sitting, he exercises all kinds of little arts to entice away every intruder from the nest, wheeling round and round in the air near him, so as to fix his attention, screaming mournfully his incessant peewit till he has drawn him even further and further from the point of his anxiety and love. The little quartet brood, which are covered with down when hatched, begin to run almost as soon as they leave the shell. And then the poor mother bird has to exercise all her little arts also. And indeed the care and solicitude of both parents is wonderful. Suppose now the little helpless group is running here and there, as merry as life can make them, and a man, a boy, or a dog, or perhaps all three are seen approaching. At once the little birds squat close to the earth so that they become almost invisible, and the parent birds are on the alert, whirling round and round the disturber, angry and troubled, wailing and crying their doleful peewit cry, drawing them ever further and further away from the brood. Should, however, the artifice not succeed, and the terrible intruder still obstinately advance in the direction of the young, they try a new artifice, drop to the ground and running along in the opposite course, pretend lameness, tumbling feebly along in the most artful manner, thus apparently offering the easiest and most tempting prey, till having securely lured away the enemy, they rise at once into the air, screaming again their peewit, but now as if laughing over their accomplished scheme. The young, which are hatched in April, are in full plumage by the end of July, when the birds assemble in flocks and, leaving the seashore or the marshy moorland, betake themselves to downs and sheep walks, where they soon become fat and are said to be excellent eating. Happily, however, for them, they are not in as much request for the table as they were in former times. Thus we find in an ancient book of housekeeping expenses called the Northumberland Household Book that they were entered under the name of wipes and charged 1 penny each, and that they were once considered a first-rate dish is proved by being entered as forming a part of his lordship's own mess, or portion of food, mess being so used in those days, about the time probably when the Bible was translated into English. Thus we find in the beautiful history of Joseph and his brethren, he sent messes to them, but Benjamin's mess was 5 times as much as any of theirs. Here I would remark on the old name of wipes for this bird. The country people in the Midland counties still call them pie wipes. But now again to our birds. The peewit, like the gull, may easily be tamed to live in gardens, where it is not only useful by ridding them of worms, slugs, and other troublesome creatures, but it is very amusing from its quaint odd ways. Beswick tells us of one so kept by the Reverend J. Carlyle, Vicar of Newcastle, which I'm sure will interest my readers. And I will tell you that story next time out. If you would like to pick this up where we've left off, or see some of the lovely drawings that are referred to in the text, you can, as always, find the original on Project Gutenberg at the link in the show notes. Thanks again for joining me on this episode of Sleepy Time Tales, the podcast designed around a bedtime story to help you get a restful night. New episodes will be released every Sunday night to give you something fresh to help you rest in a new week. But make sure to follow or subscribe in whatever service you use so that you get your new episodes whenever they come out. Good night, and sweet dreams.